The air inside the Mugello pit lane felt different. It wasn't the usual frantic energy of a Grand Prix weekend. It was something heavier, something clinical. Behind the shuttered doors of the Yamaha garage, a machine sat in the shadows, a V4 prototype that represented years of internal political warfare and hundreds of millions in investment. But the machine wasn't the only story. All eyes were on the man climbing into the leathers, Toprak Razgatlıoğlu. The Superbike King, the outsider. For years, the MotoGP paddock had whispered that Toprak's style was too wild for the delicate aerodynamic ballet of modern Grand Prix racing. They said his signature stoppies and violent late-braking maneuvers would never work on a prototype chassis built for precision. But as the engines fired up, a haunting roar echoed through the Tuscan hills, a sound Yamaha fans had been waiting decades to hear. This wasn't the high-pitched scream of the old inline-4. This was the guttural, menacing growl of a V4. Toprak didn't look like a man under pressure. He looked like a hunter. As he rolled down the pit lane, the engineers held their breath. They weren't just testing a new engine, they were testing the validity of their entire future. If this failed, Yamaha's era of dominance was officially dead. But as the first session concluded, the data monitors began to flicker with numbers that didn't make sense. Toprak wasn't just riding the bike, he was bending it to his will. And what the telemetry showed in those first few hours would send a shiver through every rival garage from Bologna to Tokyo. Yet this was only the beginning of a far bigger storm. Mugello is a cathedral of speed, and its most sacred corners are the Arrabbiata 1 and 2. These are high-speed, blind-entry right-handers that demand total trust in the front end. Most riders approach them with a surgical, sweeping line. Toprak, however, brought a chainsaw to a scalpel fight. The internal data from the morning session revealed a staggering anomaly. While most MotoGP riders transition from brake to throttle in a smooth, calculated arc, Toprak was delaying his braking markers to a point that seemed physically impossible. He was deep diving into the corners, the rear wheel hovering inches off the ground, yet somehow finding a way to lock the bike into a stable line. The front-end feedback is the key, a team source whispered behind the scenes. Toprak wasn't fighting the V4, he was using its increased engine braking to stabilize the chassis in a way no one had seen before. He wasn't chasing a single fast lap, he was hunting for a feeling. By mid-morning, he had found the operating window for the electronics and the chassis, a process that usually takes a veteran rider weeks, if not months. His throttle stability through the 1-2 sequence was described by technicians as unreal. He was losing zero time on entry, and because the V4 allowed for a more compact cornering phase, he was repaying that aggression with a clean, violent acceleration on the exit. The Yamaha engineers, usually stoic and reserved, were seen exchanging glances. They had built a monster, and they had finally found a rider brave enough to feed it. But while the garage celebrated, a silent observer was watching from the pit wall, and his expression wasn't one of joy. It was one of intense, calculated concern. Fabio Quartararo is the undisputed face of Yamaha. He is the man who dragged the aging inline-4 to a world title against the Ducati Armada. But as he stood on the pit wall, his eyes weren't on the stopwatch. They were on the data monitors. Fabio was reportedly transfixed by Toprak's lean angles. According to internal reports, the world champion began a series of intense discussions with the lead technicians. He wanted to know how a rider with zero V4 experience was managing to delay his braking markers so far past the traditional limit. There is a specific psychological pressure that comes when a guest rider enters your house and starts moving the furniture. Quartararo wasn't just impressed, he was startled. He reportedly asked the technicians for a direct comparison of brake pressure and engine mapping. He wanted to see the Toprak overlay. Paddock insiders claimed the atmosphere between the two sides of the garage grew heavy with professional respect, but jagged with tension. Fabio saw a new perspective on how his own bike could be ridden. He saw a style that was extreme, yet somehow cleaner than his own in the mid-corner phase. As the sun reached its peak over the circuit, the focus shifted from short bursts of speed to something much more grueling. The team moved into a phase of secrecy that excluded even the most senior paddock photographers. Because what they were about to test in the afternoon would determine if this bike could actually survive a 20-lap war. The afternoon session saw the garage doors partially lowered. This was the maturation phase. The flashy time attacks were replaced by the monotonous, punishing reality of race simulations. Yamaha introduced a lower aerodynamic package, not the massive, wing-heavy design seen on the Ducati, but a subtle, revised airflow system around the exhaust and swing arm. The goal: stability. Mugello's long straight is notorious for headshake, a violent oscillation that occurs when a bike's power exceeds its aerodynamic grip. In the past, Yamaha riders had to fight the bike just to keep it straight. But with the new V4 torque management, Toprak looked eerily calm. The bike didn't wander, it tracked like a laser. Technical analysts observed that the rear tire degradation was becoming linear. In the world of MotoGP, linear is a beautiful word. It means the tire isn't falling off a cliff after 5 laps. It means the electronics are finally talking to the rubber in a language they both understand. Toprak was testing different engine mappings mid-run, shifting from a smooth initial throttle response to a mid-phase aggressive setting. He was molding the V4 to his soul. Every time he entered the Busing corner, the final long left-hander, he was finding more traction, more drive, and more speed. The engineers' faces shifted from serious alertness to a quiet, terrifying confidence. However, the twist that followed would change the championship narrative entirely. While the rest of the world was focused on Toprak's entry speed, a secret experiment was happening under the bodywork. Yamaha conducted a mid-distance endurance test behind closed doors. They ran the V4 with conservative fuel settings and intentionally stressed components to see where the breaking point was. The results were staggering. Toprak was asked to repeat the exact same lap pattern under varying tire conditions. Usually, as a tire wears, the lap times grow erratic. Not today. Toprak's lap time variation was among the smallest ever recorded in a private Yamaha test. "He isn't forcing the bike," one mechanic reportedly said. "He's dancing with it." There were no excessive slides, no desperate corrections, just a relentless metronomic pace that suggested the Yamaha V4 wasn't just a prototype, it was a finished weapon. The durability tests on engine temperature and component stress came back green across the board. The V4 project was officially alive. But as the session reached its final 30 minutes, the team decided to take the leash off. They gave Toprak the AMAP: full power, soft tires, a clear track. What happened next left even his closest team members stunned. The climax of the day arrived in a moment of absolute silence. The Tuscan hills seemed to hold their breath as Toprak exited the pit lane for his final flying lap. This wasn't just about Yamaha anymore. This was about the history of the Mugello circuit. For years, Marc Marquez and the Ducati riders had held the benchmarks for courage at this track. Their records were considered the gold standard of what a human and a machine could achieve. Toprak, fueled by the data he had gathered over 2 days, began a lap that looked like a glitch in the matrix. He was deeper into the brakes at San Donato than any rider in history. He was faster through the Casanova Savelli transition than the telemetry predicted was possible. By the time he hit the Arrabbiata sequence, the timing screens were lighting up in a way that defied logic. He crossed the line, the numbers flashed. Toprak Razgatlıoğlu had just broken the untouchable Mugello record. In a private test on a prototype bike, he had dethroned the ghosts of the past. The atmosphere in the paddock changed instantly. Rival scouts who had been watching through binoculars from the hills began making frantic phone calls. The Superbike guy hadn't just adapted, he had reset the ceiling of what the Yamaha V4 could do. He proved that unbelievable speed doesn't come from luck, it comes from a perfect alignment of talent, method, and a radical new technical foundation. As the sun set over the Mugello circuit, Yamaha chose to do something that sent a final, chilling message to the rest of the grid. They kept the official time records under wraps. They didn't need a press release. The look on the rival teams' faces was enough. The second day at Mugello wasn't just a test. It was a declaration of war. Yamaha isn't just preparing for the future, they are building it now, brick by carbon fiber brick. Toprak Razgatlıoğlu didn't just ride a MotoGP bike today, he changed the perspective of every engineer in the Yamaha garage. Fabio Quartararo's reaction remains the most significant symbol of the day. When a world champion looks at his teammate and sees a new way to be fast, the entire hierarchy of the sport begins to shift. The V4 project is no longer a rumor, it is a reality. And as the trucks are packed and the garage doors finally close, one thing is certain. The next time these bikes hit the track, the world won't be looking at the old guard. They'll be looking for the man who broke Mugello.